Okay, you must be asking yourself, Brock, why are you standing in a soybean field? Are you off your meds again? I'm not. What I'm trying to do is prove a point that our dyno reads from the atmosphere. Right now, it's the middle of June. I have my fancy Kestrel meter out here, and I just checked our humidity. It's about 61%, which for Dayton, Ohio, that's about the middle of the road in summertime. But I know what's about to happen. It's going to get very humid. We're going to get a lot of water in our air. So if you look behind me, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. You can see there's not really any haze going on right now. But one of these days, here very shortly, I'm going to be driving into work. I'm going to look over into the trees off into the distance, and it's going to be hazy and white. And I know what's going to happen. We're going to mysteriously lose 5, 6, 7, 8 horsepower, sometimes more. It depends on the bike. And that horsepower is going to be gone. And there's nothing we can do about it until wait for that haze to lift sometime in the fall. And we know it. It's part of being here in Dayton. If you guys, anyone who's down south, they see it earlier than we do. If you're in Florida, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You just stay home when it's terrible out there like this. So I just wanted to show you what's going on, and I'm going to show you what we do to combat that with our dyno numbers using tools like this and also the tools on our dyno. So what does a soybean field, a dyno room, and 2 really cool 1000cc motorcycles, what do they have to do with each other? And also my cool little meter here. Well, when you're testing, you have to have something that pulls everything together, a standard. So the dyno has different scales. You've heard me talk about them before if you watch our videos. We have the SAE scale, the Society of Automotive Engineering scale. We have the STD scale, which is an obsolete scale that no one uses anymore other than references for what's the most horsepower my bike can make. Then we also have no correction factor whatsoever, and we'll show you some of that stuff also. But one of the things that's important to know is how are all these related? So, because in theory, if you correct your numbers, especially to the Society of Automotive Engineering scale, everything should be the same all the time, whether it's wintertime or summertime or fall, any time of year, no matter where you are in the world, in theory, it should always be the same. Well, if you own a dyno like I do, and if other dyno operators all over the world can tell you, it's one of the most frustrating things is to try to explain to people that while the dyno does a great job of correcting, it can sort of only correct from what's there. And theory is great, but practice has a tendency to be a little different. So what we do here at Brock's, we'll use this meter to gauge what's going on around us. We'll check to make sure, because our dyno room, I mean, we're forcing air in through a 12,000 CFM blower, and we're vacuuming air out best we can through 2 20,000 CFM fans to try to get the fumes out of here. If you try and open these doors with all our ventilation on, you can't hardly open the doors. It really takes a lot of force. So the room's actually operating in a vacuum. In theory, the bike should be able to correct for that. In theory, the dyno should be able to correct for that. There's a lot of theory going on. So what we do is we have our dyno mules. We have our standards, a gauge, if you will. Christine has been a wonderful gauge since 2010. This bike does the same thing over and over again, and it doesn't matter whether we're on the drag strip, it doesn't matter whether we're on the dyno. On the drag strip, we'll use this meter to figure out something called density altitude. It's what pilots use to fly by. And it'll tell us if right now we know from the building plans of this building that floor is built 860, not 859, not 861, 860 feet above sea level. So we can plug in 860 feet above sea level. We know that at 860 foot above sea level, the barometric pressure right now is 29.82. That's what it is. I can walk over into the bean field, and I knew from yesterday that our altitude went up to right at 902 feet, 55 foot level change. Sorry, 41 foot. And so we're very exacting here. What we do with Christine is we take, and this is how crazy we are. I spent 15 years in the test industry. We will suck the fuel out of Christine, all of the old gas, doesn't matter what was in there. We will take a fresh can of oxygenated race fuel. The standard we're going to use here is VP's MR12. This time, these bikes are low compression, so that's what we'll use. Out of a sealed can, $149 for 5 gallons. We just bought 15 gallons of this stuff for a testing. And we will put Christine up here when it's time to gauge this bike apples to apples, so that we know exactly how much horsepower we have going on in this room to know whether this bike's reading a little high, reading a little low. But more importantly, after we block it out, which means the same mods that are going on with this bike are going on with that bike, then we know, regardless if the dyno's reading high, reading low, and unfortunately it's June, and we know it's very frustrating. As we build power with this bike, the weather is going to take that power away. It's okay. It's all relevant. I don't care if this bike makes 200 horsepower. I don't care if this bike makes 180 horsepower. I can tell you this bike runs 840s. So if, and depending on where we are and what this says, 840s or 850s, depending on where we are in the year. I know how fast this bike is, and if this bike and that bike make the same horsepower, make the same torque, and weigh the same, we have a scale, then they're going to be, they should be very close in performance. Given the rider, given the clutch, we don't know what the clutch is going to do on this thing. Hopefully we can fix it. There's a lot of work to be done. But the bottom line is we're going to give you the best, closest numbers we can possibly figure out. Now, I'm going to go over here to the dyno here in a moment and give you an example from Christine, our gauge of how the dyno will read different numbers given different atmospheric conditions, mainly humidity. And that's one thing that's strange. Everybody knows, if you pay any attention to performance tuning, that air that's more dense makes more power. It's just a fact of life. Now, we were over in the bean field talking about the humidity. Believe it or not, more humid air is actually less dense. Sounds backwards, right? But the moisture in the air makes the air less dense when it comes to the amount of oxygen that you can put in your engine. You're going to have to Google that. That's beyond the realm of this discussion. But let me bring you over to the dyno here and show you some real results from Christine from past dyno results in different conditions to show you what I mean. Here's a couple of Christine's charts showing different conditions. Now, there are no changes to the bike. This is purely weather related, atmospheric related, with a correction factor here, 7% humidity, 0.98, 54% humidity, 1.01 on the SAE scale. We've got 200 horsepower versus 195 horsepower. Same bike, same parts, same everything, same fuel, MR12. Now, I want to make sure that we understand, I'm not saying correction factors don't work. That's silly. It's just math. Of course they work. We have different variables. But in this particular case, we're just talking about atmospheric conditions. Let me pull up something here, a little more cumbersome with the WinPep 8 than it was the other way. So, SAE scale. Watch what happens here. I'm going to go to uncorrected. So this is no correction factor whatsoever. Now, did you notice what happened? In good conditions, we went from 200 horsepower up to 204. So the dyno was actually correcting down. We had better than perfect conditions. That's Disneyland stuff. That's like 650E break-in video stuff. I'll get to that later though. But we've the uncorrected, now we drop down to 192. This is the same motorcycle. It makes 192 or 204. That's pretty awesome, especially with no changes. So let me go over here to the STD scale, which is an old Society of Automotive scale, engineering scale. Now we've got 199 and 205. 205 is a great number. Put that on my dyno chart. I want to see that, show my buddies. Now, for our European friends, they like the DIN scale, typically. So what it does, it doesn't take humidity into consideration, so that shows you just exactly how much humidity comes into play. Pretty cool. Bam, 207. That's awesome. Well, it doesn't matter what the bike makes. 207, you know, let's go over here again. This is fun. Oops. Uncorrected. Apply. 207 or 192. It's the same bike. It's just what the dyno is reading. So what do we do with all this info? We'll have that discussion right now. So with all these variables, what can we do? Well, at Brock's Performance, we keep mountains of notes. We have procedures that we follow to try to remain very consistent when we do our testing. Simple things like nitrogen in the tires and a tire pressure or temperature sensor to monitor the temperature so the tire doesn't ball up when we're running it on the drum here. How tight we strap the bike down to the dyno, and also not removing the bike from the dyno, just taking it off and putting it back on. If you don't strap it down the same, you might not get the same readings. Weather patterns. You know, we've got, you know, we use our Kestrel meter here to watch the weather, and we watch what's on the dyno. We use the Kestrel to check absolute pressure, to verify absolute pressure on the dyno to make sure we don't have any problems with our readings. And then, you know, if we have a weather pattern moving in, you know, if we start testing in the morning and then a weather pattern moves in and it's raining, well, it's ruined all that testing. So we watch to make sure there's not a storm front coming in. Sometimes we have to wait days. Sometimes we wait weeks. I mean, you can always get a spot check if the weather's bad on something and just get a reading. But if you're truly doing testing, it doesn't work out well if you've got these variables in the weather messing things up. Another thing that's really critical, and you know, I'll watch YouTube videos every once in a while. You see these guys with their gas masks on, and you know, your health is very important. So if you've got to wear a gas mask because there's fumes coming into your dyno room, keep wearing your gas mask. But keep in mind, if your exhaust, you have some of the exhaust fumes coming out of your bike that you have to wear a gas mask, it's also diluting your intake charge. So your horsepower readings aren't correct. And you would be amazed, believe me, when we were designing our room here, you would be amazed at the difference between a pure intake charge and a diluted charge. So consistency is very important, engineering is important, and doing your homework is important. Now, what can you do when it comes to dyno readings when you go to your dyno operator? Well, the first thing is be realistic, okay? So let's talk about, you know, 650E. We dynoed his bike in the wintertime, and you know, Mustang Dame was over here. It's 7% humidity. Disneyland, that just doesn't happen in the real world. We're throwing down these crazy numbers, and you know, the bikes read fantastic. And when we were breaking Eve's stock bike in, the thing read fantastic. And you know, then when after we put the parts on, you know, the bike should read 280. Well, it should. If you come back next winter and it's 7% humidity outside with a 0.98 correction factor. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It's summertime. Our correction factor is 1.05, but that was from terrible conditions. So you have to weigh what's going on here. You have to be realistic. Same thing if you're, you know, if you're going to your dyno operator at home. If you really want to know, if you've got a bone stock bike and you want to know how much this part makes and that part makes, you can't take dyno readings from last fall, say, okay, I put in my new air filter or I put my new pipe on, and show up in the dead of summer, get a dyno reading, it's lower, and go, oh, that part sucks. That's not how it works. You have to go to the dyno, get your reading, swap that part as quickly as you can, and then get another reading. That's the only way you're going to know if that part works. And you also, if you're putting an exhaust on or an air filter, you've got to test the part, tune for that part if it needs it, and then get your reading. You can't just throw it in willy-nilly and say, oh yeah, it's the greatest in the world. So everything is relevant. And the other thing is, all dynos read differently. We're sitting here in the same spot, same place, same bike, and we get different readings. A dyno that's closer to sea level is going to read differently than a dyno that's up on a mountain in Colorado. Let's be realistic. The bikes are going to read different, the dynos are going to read different. Different brands of dynos read differently. The Superflow dynos, they read considerably lower. The Factory Pros read considerably lower. Superflow even has what they call a dyno jet correction factor, so you can click on a button, your horsepower jumps up to match a dyno jet dyno. It's just different mindsets on how the dynos read. And most guys, most red-blooded males, doesn't matter where you're from, are not going to say, oh yeah man, print me out that low little dyno number that you got up there so I can show my buddies. It's not how it works. Right? We know what this stuff's about. They want the big number. So anyway, I hope this helps clear some of this stuff up. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of different things floating around. We're all just trying to have fun, go faster with our motorcycles. So hope you learned something. Till next time, Brock for Brock's Performance. We'll see you then. Hold on. Don't turn that off. One last thing. Dynos are not about absolute numbers. What I mean by that. So Brock says his Ninja H2 kit gives you 260 horsepower. Okay, well, let's say the bike started with 200 on our dyno. And by the time we were done with our exact combination, when I say exact fuel, exact tire, exact oil, everything that we suggest for our kit took this bike from 200 to 260, right? You can't go to your dyno operator and say, hey dyno operator in a different part of the country or a different part of the world or wherever you may happen to live. Brock says my bike should make 260. Put it on your dyno. If it doesn't make 260, I'm not happy. It's not how it works. So let's say you don't want to use the same fuel we run. You want to use your fuel. Well, that takes numbers away. Let's say you don't want to use the oil that we use. You want to use your oil. Okay, well, that takes numbers away. And you already saw what happens with the conditions, right? If you really want it to work, you go to your dyno operator with your bike stock, and I know this sounds a little redundant, but let's say you put your bike on his dyno and it makes 180. Cool. Then you come back and you put our stuff on and you do everything exactly like we suggest and the bike makes 240. There's your 60 horsepower. Does it make 260? No. But it's the same relative gain. You don't have the same absolute number, 240 to 260, but it's the same thing. You got what you paid for. The bike is exactly the same, right? Quick story, before the Sport Rider test where Kent went 226 miles an hour, we put all our stuff on exactly the way we know how to put it on. We put it on their dyno. The bike only made 248 horsepower. I went, wow. We were choking to death on fumes. Their dyno room is scary. But I went, no, I know what we've got. I know how fast it goes. I'm not worried about this. Put it in the trailer, let's go. Next thing you know, we're flying. Don't let the dyno trick you. Don't let it hype you out. It's all there. Just take the numbers for what they are, a reference. Now, till next time, we'll see you then.